What it do, cuckolds? It's your boy, the hater, up in this mug. And this video that I'm gonna record right now makes me sad, right? It makes me sad because it shows that the way that things are today are objectively inferior to the way things were, right? The video is about charisma, or more accurately, the lack of charisma in today's wrestling population, right? Now, with all this being said, the hater will first disclaim that I understand that charisma is at least partially subjective. Some may argue it's completely subjective, but it definitely is at least partially subjective, right? Certain things that I might think are charismatic, other people will think are cringe, right? You see, for example, you see this a lot, but I believe that the vast majority of this discrepancy between cringe or non-charismatic to charismatic is explained more by people's inability to identify charisma, right? How many times have you seen something completely normal being labeled as cringe, right? All the time it happens, right? When I was in college, which was like 2008, I started college 2006, but you know what I mean. I'd say around 2008, the word creeper started being a thing, right? A lot of girls would say, wow, that guy's a creeper. Oh, he's such a creeper, right? And I'm sure some of you obviously remember this, right? And then one of my buddies, he said once, he was like, man, he's like, this word creeper is just being used by women to talk about guys that go up to talk to them, right? There's nothing creepy about that at all, right? There's absolutely nothing creepy about a guy going to a girl and being like, hey, how you doing? You want to get a drink? Nothing at all creepy about that. But because the other half of the population, and most men too, decided that this was like unacceptable behavior for some reason, that person became known as a creeper. The same thing has happened today with wrestling, right? The realities are that people nowadays cannot distinguish between charisma and a lack of charisma, right? They think that, and it's the same thing with humor too, by the way, right? People think that wit, right, or the ability to get someone to understand what you're saying cleverly, is the same thing as charisma or the same thing as humor, and it's not. So, for example, when CM Punk says, oh, when Vince McMahon dies, his doofus son-in-law is going to inherit it, right? That's something that is not charismatic, right? That's wit. He doesn't have to say Triple H. He can say doofus son-in-law, and everyone knows what he's talking about. And people have hyped that up as if it's like this brilliant line, right? I've heard it many times. The ability to differentiate charisma from lack of charisma, I think, is the biggest culprit, like I said. People's inability to do so is what has led to people being once again manipulated with boring ass things that they tell you are actually not boring, right? You ever watch like any kind of reality TV show, right? I'll give you a great example. You watch The Bachelor, right? Or The Bachelorette, I should say, right? And every season you get these like 20 or 30 like basically like half men. Like you see them and you're like, where the fuck did they find these guys? Like none of these guys at all like is anything special, right? They're all boring and insecure. They're all like, my past, my trauma. Like, shut the fuck up. Enough with your past and enough with trauma. Like, is there anybody left that's a normal person that has dealt with their trauma in a healthy way by the time they're in their fucking 30s? It's time to grow up, motherfucks. But anyways, that's a mini rant against The Bachelor. But basically, at some point, despite every one of these guys being half broken, most of them having insecurities, and like 40% of them crying on TV like a bunch of sissies, right? Oh, it's okay for a man to cry under very specific circumstances, like death in the family. Beyond that, no, it's not okay for a man to cry. Hold that shit in and deal with it. I'm not saying repress it. I'm saying deal with it, but deal with it like a man, not like a little girl. But anyways, at some point in every episode, or every season I should say, one guy in the Bachelorette pool, they will say things like, you know, this show is hard because you have 20 alpha male in here. And every time they say this, I say to my fiance, none of these guys are alpha males. Maybe on a certain season, you might have one or two, but none of these guys are real alpha males. Sure, they're in good shape and they might have decent jobs, but it doesn't mean shit. At the end of the day, these guys are full of insecurities and full of emotional instability, which are prerequisites to being an alpha male. In other words, just because these assholes say we're alpha males doesn't mean they're alpha males. Likewise, just because Michael Cole or Corey Graves tell you, wow, how charismatic is this guy, or how great is this guy, doesn't mean that they're charismatic or great. That's just a lie that they're telling you to frame the thing that you're watching as something else, right? I see on The Bachelorette, I see like some dude wearing pearls, a fucking pearl necklace. This is years ago. Then all of a sudden, you know, a few years later, all these dudes are wearing pearl necklaces. And I'm like, what? I'm like, wait a second. Not all of these guys can be bisexuals and then, or homosexuals. And people are like, no, that's not gay anymore. Wait, what? You're wearing women's jewelry. What the fuck? I didn't get the memo to this. That's fucking weird. Why are you wearing women's jewelry, right? The point I'm trying to make is this is how things change around you. And just because someone does something and then labels it as like, this is okay, doesn't mean that this is okay. Now, if you want to wear a pearl necklace, be my guest. I ain't against it. Do what you got to do. But recognize that people out there are going to look at you like, what the fuck? This person is not a serious man. A serious man would never wear pearl necklaces or a dangly earring. Unless they're Keith Richards, you know what I'm saying? And that's a different story altogether, obviously. But the point I'm trying to make is that the amount of lies that are being told about who is and is not charismatic is getting to us. It's getting to us. So now people say things like, wow, Kevin Owens is charismatic. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? No, he isn't. What? In what world is Kevin Owens charismatic? They're like Trick Williams, who can't cut a promo to save his life. They're like, he's charismatic. No, he isn't, motherfucks. Very few people in wrestling history are charismatic, right? Most of them become world champions one way or another. That's like how important charisma is. Not all of them. You got a few, like Val Venus was charismatic. You know, I got to throw Val Venus in this piece, and he didn't become world champion. One of the biggest bullshits of all time, if you ask me. But anyways, that's how the cookie crumbles. You understand me? The way that people look at these things is exactly like I'm saying. The fact of the matter is that we have people that are charismatic, but they're few and far in between. So instead of finding people that are charismatic and turning them into wrestlers, WWE, and also AEW, of course, instead, they find wrestlers, and I don't even mean athletes. At this point, I mean wrestlers. Like, they'll find some guy that's been in the indies for 12 years. They'll find that guy, and they'll be like, we can add some charisma to him. And then they can't, because that's not how it works, motherfucks, right? And what happens next is they have to tell you the guy's charismatic, right? And you're like, no, he isn't. You know what I mean? Like, remember, like, what's his face? Stokely Hathaway, whatever the fuck his name was in WWE, right? He managed the diamond mine, right? This guy has absolutely no business being a manager whatsoever. He brings absolutely nothing to the table. The fact that this guy's made a career out of being a manager is just absurd. But anyways, he was managing this guy who was like the first part of the diamond mine, and the guy was called Tyler Rust. And I'm like, this guy is like the most generic jobber I've ever seen in my life. Like, this guy's never gonna make it. So naturally he gets released like in a few months. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, you can't just take, he looks good, he had like a great physique, and maybe he was a great wrestler, right? But he comes from the indies, and it's like, he doesn't have the charisma. They want to make him charismatic. You can't do that. You can't make Sami Zayn charismatic. You can't make Kevin Owens charismatic. You can't make Trick Williams charismatic. You just can't. You just can't. And if you could, it would take an inordinate amount of resources to the point where it's not necessary. The smarter thing to do is find someone that's charismatic and teach them the relatively easy fake sport of wrestling, motherfucks. Logan Paul is one of the best wrestlers in the world. I don't care what people say. He's one of the best wrestlers in the world. And he's doing it as a hobby. It's like the 7th most important thing in his life. You know what I mean? And he's better than people who have dedicated their lives to it. Like, I'm not going to live in a world where people try to convince me that Sami Zayn is better in the ring than Logan Paul. No, he isn't. No, he isn't, motherfucks. Oh, Logan Paul rehearses his matches. Why shouldn't he? It's a fake sport. Why wouldn't you rehearse the match? In fact, if you don't rehearse the match and you have Gunther-like matches, you should be released. I want people to, as Abraham Lincoln, I think it was, either Abraham or George Washington said, if you give me an axe and you ask me to cut a tree in 2 hours, I'm going to spend 1 hour and 45 minutes sharpening the axe, right? That's what people don't do anymore. They don't sharpen the axe. It's a bunch of dull axe morons just hitting the same tree. Nothing's happening. You see what I'm getting at, cucks? And the reality is that now the fans, this has bled into the fans. The fans no longer have the capacity to differentiate charismatic from non-charismatic, right? A great example would be the booty guy. Whatever his name is, the booty guy that made a video about me, right? And one of the things that he said in the video about me was a response to something that I said. And what I said was that you can look at Shawn Michaels making his entrance, you can look at Obafemi making his entrance, and you'll know which one's the star and which one is not the star, right? And then he was like, how would you know? How would you know? What do you mean, how would you know? Because you see Obafemi, and Obafemi is basically like a black Vladimir Kozlov, right? And then you see Shawn Michaels, and he's fucking Shawn Michaels. You know, it speaks for itself. The way he carries himself is more interesting. He's more charismatic, and that's why one is a legend, and the other one is a guy that is feuding with Tony D'Angelo over the mid-card title in the developmental league. You see what I'm getting at here? So these are things that we used to be able to quickly differentiate, right? People used to be able to look at something and be like, this is cool, this is boring, right? But somewhere down the line, when all these indie jobbers who weren't cool started coming in, the indie jobber fans who are basically wrestling hipsters, they're like, oh, I don't like, The Miz because he's a TV guy. I instead, the best wrestler that I've seen is Davey Richards. And then they're like, Davey Richards does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The Miz would destroy him in 3 seconds in everything that matters in terms of being a wrestler, right? Davey Richards needs to be signed, right? And then this led to a logical conclusion of all the wrestlers being signed being shit wrestlers with no personalities that they have to tell us have personalities, right? Like Finn Balor. I see this guy and I'm like, what the fuck? They brought another Hideo Itami who's white to help Hideo Itami. They both use a double stomp finisher. This has to be a joke. It's two 5'3" guys with double stomp finishers beating the Ascension, which was Connor and the other fucking guy whose name was Victor. Connor and Victor, who are these two monsters who are undefeated for like a year and a half, and they're jobbing out to Hideo Itami and Finn Balor. Have you lost your mind? Like these guys, like Connor by himself would destroy both of them in 1 minute. You know what I mean? But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Then Finn Balor starts coming out with paint, and people are like, wow, he's so charismatic. What the fuck are you talking about? He is a dork. Like, he's a guy who comes out, he makes faces while wearing face paint. He's the guy, every high school had one of these. When near Halloween, there was always be one student who would come to class, and he would paint his face like the Crow. You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck? And then he'd get pushed into lockers by people who don't do that shit, right? The problem is, we've lost touch of what is cool and what is not. To the point now where people like Booty Guy, he says like, oh, I don't see the difference between Shawn Michaels and Obafemi as they enter. You don't? Every man, woman, and child does, except for you apparently, right? And not just him. The video's not about him, but everybody that doesn't understand it. That's perfectly fine. Wrestling fans no longer understand this key difference. But there is a key difference. So when people tell you, oh, Kevin Owens is like, I'll never forget it, motherfuckers. I read this review for Raw once, this is many years ago, and it was a promo between The Miz and Dolph Ziggler, right? And then, like, the person that wrote the review, he wrote it in such a way where he said something along the lines of, and Dolph Ziggler matched Miz's charisma, even exceeding it once in a while. And I'm like, this is a bold-faced lie, right? It's either a lie or the person watching this has no idea what charisma is. Because the notion that Dolph Ziggler is charismatic is ridiculous. The notion that he's as charismatic as The Miz or more is absurd. There is no chance that this is true. Dolph Ziggler has no charisma. Here's how you know if someone does or doesn't have charisma. If they decide to like color their hair and make themselves stand out physically, they don't have charisma, right? The Rock never did that. Stone Cold never did that. The Miz doesn't do that. They're just regular dudes. But they come out there and they don't need to like bleach their hair like platinum blonde like Cucky Rhodes and Dolph Ziggler. They don't need to because they're inherently interesting, right? You don't look at them and say, oh, this guy's boring, but I like his blonde hair. It's eccentric. You don't need to say that about The Rock. The Rock doesn't need blonde hair. The Rock can get over sunglasses, motherfuckers. The Rock has been able to get over the eyebrow. Like if you ask someone randomly, what's the hardest thing you could ever get over? Someone would probably say, if you thought about it long and hard enough, the eyebrow. How can you get the eyebrow over? Well, The Rock did it, right? You think that Kevin Owens could ever do something like that in his life? You think Nakamura has the capacity to achieve this? They can tell you that Nakamura is charismatic 100 times, But when you look at Nakamura, you're like, where's this charisma? It's just an idiot, like twitching and pretending he's Michael Jackson. Like 40 years after Michael Jackson was relevant. You know what I mean? He just does Michael Jackson moves, and people are like, it's funny because he's Japanese. And I'm like, this is lame. It was cool when Michael Jackson did it, because Michael Jackson had unparalleled charisma, right? You could think whatever you want about it, but he was a charismatic dude, no doubt about it, right? So the idea is what the idea is, right? You've got a bunch of people out there that are running the narrative, and they're telling you that what you're seeing is charismatic, when you yourself know damn well that what you're seeing is not that. This has poisoned the minds of the fans, and now nobody even wants people to be charismatic anymore. Now people just want Cody Rhodes, right? Well, obviously the real people don't. They're going to turn on him. I said 8 months. We're nearing that time. Although, to be honest, I think I should get an extension on my 8-month prediction, because like a lot of the time, I also assumed he'd be on TV. You know what I mean? That was a mistake of mine. It might take some time, because if you're on TV once every 3 months, you know, you wrestle once every 3 months, people don't have the opportunity to turn on you, you know, and you know, Triple H understands this at least. But anyways, neither here nor there. Point being, cuckolds, that the truth is what the truth is, and that people are not attuned to what makes good wrestling good. Now, obviously, most people, like if you look at the population of the United States, most people obviously are attuned to this, because that's why they don't watch anymore, right? I'm talking about the wrestling fans, right? Wrestling has catered to their niche audience, which turns out to be shrinking ever so often. And how can it not? But there you have it, cucks. One of the reasons is because nobody cares or is able to spot charisma anymore, and as a result, that we have nobody that's charismatic. It's basically just like The Miz, like R-Truth, people that are either in their 50s or nearing their 50s, because everybody else is like a Seth Rollins. Like Seth Rollins has like zero charisma. I've never seen anybody with less attributes than Seth Rollins get pushed like Seth Rollins does, right? Like they're like, oh, he reinvented himself. It's the same fucking gimmick every time. The visionary, the messiah, the crazy wearing women's clothes Seth Rollins, it's the same Seth Rollins. You know? I don't know how people don't see this. It's the same guy. He does the same exact things. He just calls himself something different. Oh, I'm the architect. Oh, I'm the visionary. Oh, how is the visionary different from the architect? Oh, you just don't understand, man. You just don't get it, you know? Yeah, you don't get it. That's what it is. If you got it, you'd see that it's totally different, bro. Exactly. Kiss my ass and fuck all this shit, pin this bitch.